November 17, 1944, France. The fields near Hürtgen Forest are drowned in mud and rain. Visibility is almost zero, a gray world where sound travels farther than sight. A squad of U.S. infantrymen crouches behind a shattered stone wall, waiting for the order to move. Private William R. Turner feels the weight of his M1 Garand slipping in his hands, slick with mud. He wipes the bolt, it sticks again. Somewhere beyond the fog, a German MG-42 opens up, the familiar rhythm tearing through the air. Turner dives for cover. His rifle jams completely. He knows what that means. With shaking hands, he reaches down to his belt. The cold grip of his Colt M1911 meets his palm. He racks the slide, chambering a .45 round that gleams dull in the rain. The weapon feels heavier, steadier. One squeeze of the trigger and the recoil thunders through his hand. A single, unmistakable sound cutting through the machine gun bursts. For thousands of soldiers like Turner, that sound wasn't just survival, it was trust made of steel. The story of why U.S. soldiers trusted the Colt 1911 begins decades before that cold November morning in France. It starts in another war far from Europe, the Philippines, at the dawn of the 20th century. In 1899, American troops found themselves fighting Moro warriors in the jungles of Mindanao. The standard U.S. sidearm then, the .38 long Colt revolver, proved shockingly inadequate. Even when hit multiple times, attackers often kept advancing. Reports poured in of soldiers being overrun at close range. The Army needed something new, something powerful enough to stop a charging enemy instantly. The search for a better pistol began. Enter John Moses Browning, the self-taught American inventor whose designs already powered much of the U.S. arsenal. In 1905, Browning presented an automatic pistol chambered in .45 caliber, a round large enough to deliver true stopping power. Over the next 6 years, his prototype evolved through rigorous Army trials, surviving sand, water, dust, and thousands of rounds. The final test came in 1910 at the Springfield Armory. 2 pistols remained, Browning's Colt and a design by Savage Arms. The Army fired 6,000 rounds through each. Browning's Colt finished without a single malfunction, an unheard of feat at the time. Savage's weapon overheated and jammed repeatedly. On March 29, 1911, the U.S. Army officially adopted Browning's design as the pistol, automatic, caliber .45, M1911. The weapon was unlike anything the world had seen. Its short recoil operation, simple takedown, and solid steel frame made it both powerful and reliable. Firing the .45 ACP cartridge, it struck with nearly twice the force of the old .38. To soldiers, it wasn't just another sidearm. It was reassurance in their holster. When the First World War broke out, the 1911 went with them. In the trenches of France, American doughboys carried it into brutal close-quarters combat. Reports described German soldiers shocked by the weapon's impact, often comparing it to a small cannon. Pilots, officers, machine gun crews, and engineers all valued it for one reason: it worked when nothing else did. After 1918, the Colt 1911 became a symbol of American reliability. The interwar years saw small refinements: an arched mainspring housing, improved sights, and a shorter trigger, but the essence remained unchanged. By the late 1930s, as tensions rose once again in Europe and the Pacific, the Army saw no reason to replace it. Factories in Connecticut and beyond prepared to produce the pistol on a massive scale. By 1941, the 1911A1, a slightly updated version, was standard issue for nearly every U.S. branch. From tank commanders to paratroopers, it became part of their identity. To understand why soldiers came to trust it above all else, we have to step into those factories and the mindset of a nation gearing up for total war, when precision, production, and purpose merged into one. By the late 1930s, America was preparing for a war that seemed inevitable. The lessons of World War I were still fresh, and the U.S. Army knew the value of reliable, simple, and mass-producible weapons. The Colt 1911 fit that vision perfectly. It didn't need redesign, it just needed numbers. When the United States entered World War II in December 1941, production of the M1911A1 expanded beyond Colt's Hartford factory. Remington Rand, Ithaca Gun Company, Union Switch and Signal, and Singer Manufacturing joined in. Typewriter makers, gun firms, and even signal equipment manufacturers began crafting pistols to military specifications. Each one was stamped with U.S. property and a serial number, a promise of reliability from the factory floor to the battlefield. Over 1.9 million M1911A1 pistols would be produced during the war. Despite coming from 5 different companies, parts were fully interchangeable, a rare achievement at the time. A soldier could field strip one pistol and reassemble it with parts from another, and it would still function flawlessly. That level of precision spoke volumes about American industry's discipline and coordination. To most soldiers, the Colt wasn't their primary weapon. The Garand rifle, the Thompson submachine gun, or the bar usually filled that role. But every man who carried the 1911 knew its purpose, the last defense when everything else failed. Tankers kept them within arm's reach inside cramped hulls. Airmen wore them strapped to flight suits in case of a crash behind enemy lines. Engineers and medics carried them for emergencies. The pistol was short, rugged, and reassuringly heavy, about 2.5 pounds of steel and trust. In the mud of Italy or the jungles of Guadalcanal, that weight felt like certainty. To the enemies of the United States, it was something else entirely. German soldiers who examined captured 1911s called it brutal and excessive. The 9mm Luger P08 and Walther P38, the pride of German engineering, were sleek and precise but less powerful. Their 9mm rounds offered higher capacity, yet lacked the stopping power of the .45 ACP. Japanese troops in the Pacific, armed with the Nambu Type 14, faced an even greater disadvantage. The Nambu's weak cartridge and unreliable safety made it notorious even among its own users. When Japanese soldiers first encountered captured American pistols, their reports noted how heavy and large the Colt seemed, but also how devastating its fire was in close combat. Many were stunned that American troops carried such a sidearm as standard issue, reflecting a level of individual firepower the Axis rarely matched. But the 1911 wasn't just a weapon. It was an extension of the American soldier's character, practical, unpretentious, and built to endure. Unlike the intricate Luger, which required meticulous cleaning and precision fitting, the Colt tolerated dirt, sand, and neglect. It would fire after being dropped, buried, or soaked in seawater. That's why soldiers began to speak about it differently. They didn't just respect it, they trusted it. They knew it would fire when nothing else would. By 1943, training manuals even emphasized the pistol's dependability. This weapon will function under the most adverse conditions. Keep it ready. It may save your life. And for many, it did. From the muddy foxholes of Normandy to the island caves of Okinawa, the Colt 1911 became a symbol of survival, the last resort that always answered when called. Next, we look at what that trust felt like from the soldier's perspective, in the field, under fire, and face-to-face with the enemy. For the men who carried it, the Colt 1911 was more than a piece of standard equipment. It was personal. Every scratch on its slide, every dent on its grip told a story. Soldiers often remembered where and when they had fired it, and what it had saved them from. Infantrymen spoke of the pistol as the weapon of last resort. In the European theater, where dense forests and ruined towns turned firefights into sudden, close-quarters encounters, a sidearm could mean the difference between life and death. One veteran from the 1st Infantry Division described how his 1911 never left his hip, even when the rifle did. When his M1 jammed during an ambush outside Aachen, he fired 3 rounds from his Colt. Fast, instinctive, effective. "You don't think about aiming," he said later. "You just trust it to do what it always does." Tank crews had their own bond with the pistol. Inside a Sherman, space was scarce, and if the tank was hit, escape could be chaotic. Crews kept their 1911s loaded and accessible, often mounted near the driver's seat or hung from the turret. In the burning wreckage of disabled armor, the Colt was the last reliable friend. Airmen shared similar stories. Pilots flying P-51s or B-17s over Europe often carried 1911s in shoulder holsters, not for combat in the air, but for what came after. If they were shot down, the pistol offered a chance to survive capture or defend themselves until rescue. For those stranded in enemy territory, It was a final, tangible connection to home. Even in the Pacific, where jungle fighting reduced distances to mere feet, the Colt became a trusted equalizer. In the dense undergrowth of Guadalcanal or the caves of Iwo Jima, rifles were often too long to maneuver effectively. Marines and Army infantry used their 1911s at point-blank range, where its heavy .45 caliber rounds stopped charging enemies immediately. It wasn't just the pistol's performance that built this trust. It was its predictability. The 1911's single-action trigger and grip safety were simple and intuitive. The gun pointed naturally, its recoil strong but manageable. Soldiers quickly learned that if they did their part, the Colt would always do its own. Many customized their pistols with personal touches. Initials carved into grips, leather holsters darkened by sweat and oil, even makeshift lanyards tied with parachute cord. These weren't regulations. They were rituals of ownership. The 1911 became a companion, one that represented safety in a world where almost nothing felt certain. That bond ran deep. In letters home, soldiers wrote about the pistol in the same tone they used for comrades: reliable, constant, unshakable. One Marine wrote, "If I have this Colt and a handful of ammo, I'm not alone." But trust doesn't form in isolation. It's built not only from use but from comparison, seeing what the enemy carried, what failed, and what endured. And to understand that contrast, we turn to the other side of the war, the engineers, officers, and soldiers who faced the Colt 1911 and came to respect, and even fear, what it represented. From a technological and enemy perspective, the Colt 1911 stood out as something uniquely American: direct, overbuilt, and unapologetically powerful. While European weapon designers emphasized precision mechanics and compact form, the U.S. valued rugged function over refinement. That philosophy was embodied in every line of John Browning's design. At its heart was a short recoil system, a simple, brilliant mechanism that absorbed the .45 ACP's immense force and redirected it with perfect timing. When fired, the barrel and slide recoiled together briefly, then separated as the spent casing was ejected and the next round chambered. It was smooth, efficient, and nearly foolproof. This reliability wasn't theoretical, it was proven under battlefield abuse. Sand, mud, and cold rarely stopped it. The tolerances were generous enough for dirt to pass through but tight enough for accuracy to remain lethal within combat ranges. The .45 ACP round itself was a defining factor. Developed alongside the pistol, it was designed to hit hard and stop instantly. At close range, it transferred enormous energy on impact, something the 9mm Parabellum couldn't match. German soldiers who faced it in North Africa or France described its effect as devastating. Japanese troops, often smaller in stature and lightly equipped, were stunned by its stopping power during the first clashes in the Pacific. Axis officers took note. Captured Colt 1911s were analyzed by German and Japanese ordnance departments. Reports described the weapon as simple, massive, and effective. German engineers admired its reliability but criticized its excessive size and recoil, reflecting the difference in design philosophy. Where the Germans sought mechanical elegance, the Americans built for endurance and instinctive handling. Japanese officers, many of whom carried the Nambu Type 14, often found their sidearms embarrassing in comparison. The Nambu was fragile, its spring weak, and its 8mm round underpowered. In jungle warfare, humidity caused constant malfunctions. When Japanese soldiers captured 1911s, they frequently used them despite limited ammunition, a silent testament to the gun's reputation. The Colt's durability was also industrial. Every manufacturer working under wartime contract, Colt, Remington Rand, Ithaca, Union Switch and Signal and Singer, followed the same exacting standards. Parts from one could fit another perfectly, despite coming from entirely different assembly lines. For enemy observers, that level of interchangeability was astonishing. It showed how U.S. industry could mass-produce quality without sacrificing precision. But the Colt 1911 wasn't just a weapon, it was a psychological instrument. The deep, heavy report of its shot carried across battlefields, distinct from rifles and submachine guns. Soldiers on both sides could recognize it instantly. American troops felt reassurance in that sound. Axis troops often felt dread. The .45's sharp recoil and echoing blast signaled finality. One well-placed round meant the fight was over. To the Germans and Japanese, the pistol symbolized something larger than its size, the American approach to war. A combination of practical innovation, industrial might, and unshakable confidence. To the Americans, it was proof that reliability was a form of power. And as the war intensified across Europe and the Pacific, the Colt 1911's legend only grew. Soon, it wouldn't just be admired, it would be tested in the most desperate, close-range moments of the war, where its presence meant survival and its absence meant death. June 7, 1944, Normandy, France. The second day after D-Day. The beaches are secured, but the countryside is chaos. Fields are mined, hedgerows conceal ambushes, and every farmhouse could hide a German machine gun team. A patrol from the 101st Airborne moves cautiously along a narrow road near Corentin. Corporal James "Red" Lawson leads the way, his Thompson slung low. When a burst of MG-42 fire rips through the hedge, two men fall instantly. Lawson dives behind a wrecked cart. His submachine gun jams, the bolt half-cocked, the barrel clogged with dirt. He doesn't hesitate. He draws his 1911, aims toward the muzzle flash, and fires 3 times. The sharp, heavy cracks echo through the hedgerow. When the squad regroups, the gunner is down. The Colt had done what every soldier expected it to do, deliver when nothing else could. Scenes like this were repeated thousands of times across both theaters of war. In Sicily, Italy, Belgium, the Philippines, and Okinawa, the 1911 became the soldier's last reliable line. It was used in ambushes, cave clearings, tank escapes, and night patrols, anywhere survival came down to seconds. In the Pacific, that trust turned into reverence. Marines on Saipan carried the Colt into brutal close quarters fighting inside Japanese tunnels. One sergeant from the 2nd Marine Division later described the experience. When you're in a space so small you can feel the enemy breathing, that .45 is all that matters. The pistol's stopping power was so absolute that many Marines chose to carry 2, one on each hip. Airmen also relied on it in the most vulnerable moments of their service. When a B-24 crew went down over New Guinea in 1943, survivors used their 1911s to fend off attackers until rescue. For them, the pistol wasn't about offense, it was hope in a holster. Tankers, whose steel armor could become a coffin after a hit, often swore by the pistol's dependability. In North Africa, when a Sherman crew was forced to abandon their burning tank, one gunner described climbing out through smoke and chaos, firing his 1911 at approaching German infantry. It wasn't accuracy that mattered, it was assurance. The Colt would work even there. The weapon had a habit of being in the right place at the worst times. It was present in the snow of Bastogne, in the dust of Anzio, and in the ruins of Manila. Its users came from every background: city boys, farmhands, college students, career soldiers. Yet all of them shared one truth. When the rifle failed, the Colt did not. By late 1944, commanders recognized its near-mythic reputation. Field reports consistently praised its performance under the harshest conditions. Soldiers stopped calling it a pistol. They called it the .45, as if it needed no name, no introduction, just recognition. But the true measure of that trust would come in the closing months of the war, when chaos reached its peak and the lines between survival, desperation, and courage blurred completely. March 1945, Iwo Jima, Pacific Theater. The air is heavy with sulfur and smoke. The volcanic soil burns underfoot. The island is barely 8 square miles, yet every inch is contested. U.S. Marines push through a maze of trenches and caves defended by an enemy that refuses to surrender. In the heart of that chaos, close combat becomes the rule, not the exception. Automatic rifles jam in the ash, and grenades roll unpredictably on the uneven ground. The Colt 1911, heavy and blunt, becomes the weapon of survival. Marines enter cave openings one by one, pistols ready. Each shot is deliberate, one round, one decision. Reports from Iwo Jima tell of Marines firing until the slide locked back, then reloading by feel in the dark. The weapon never failed them. Its short recoil system kept functioning, even coated in volcanic dust and blood. Its 7-round magazine felt small, but every bullet counted. Lieutenant Colonel Chandler Johnson, commander of the 2nd Battalion, 28th Marines, described the pistol's impact in a letter home. "Our men swear by the .45. It saves more lives here than any other single weapon we carry." Thousands of miles away, in Europe, the same story unfolds under different skies. During the push across the Rhine, American tankers and engineers faced desperate German counterattacks. In one recorded encounter near Remagen, a Sherman tank was disabled by a Panzerfaust. As the crew bailed out, German infantry rushed their position. Sergeant Harold Stokes later wrote, "We didn't have time to think, we just drew our Colts. You could feel it kick like a mule, but it never missed when it mattered." That trust, repeated in every theater, became part of the 1911's identity. The weapon was no longer just a tool of war. It was a constant companion. In the chaos of global conflict, where so many machines broke down, one design continued to function exactly as promised. Even among captured Axis officers, the respect was unmistakable. German and Japanese interrogations occasionally mentioned the American heavy pistol, acknowledging its reliability. Some carried captured Colts themselves, a silent admission that when it came to personal defense, the enemy's weapon was superior. By the time the Allies advanced into Germany, the Colt 1911 had become inseparable from the image of the American soldier, dependable, direct, and powerful. It symbolized more than military engineering. It embodied a nation's belief that simplicity and strength could win any fight. And when the final months of the war brought confusion, retreat, and desperation, it was the sound of that .45 that marked survival. Its heavy crack echoed through both fronts, a reminder that no matter the odds, American soldiers always had one last answer. The Colt 1911 had proven itself beyond doubt. But the war was not yet over, and its story didn't end with victory. What followed was reflection, both military and personal, on why this weapon, above all others, earned the undying trust of those who carried it. August 1945, the Pacific quiets. The war that consumed the world finally draws to a close. In Europe, the guns have already gone silent. In Japan, the mushroom clouds over Hiroshima and Nagasaki mark the end of total war. But for the men returning home, the sounds of the battlefield still echo in their memories. And for many, so does the solid feel of the Colt 1911 in their hand. When American troops disembark at San Francisco and New York, they bring back medals, scars, and stories. Some carry their sidearms home as personal mementos, unofficially or through formal authorization. For them, the pistol represents survival. It's not about marksmanship or design anymore. It's about trust. Army surveys conducted in late 1945 and 1946 reveal something rare in military history: near-universal praise for a standard-issue sidearm. Soldiers consistently described the 1911 as utterly dependable, powerful, and the only gun that never let me down. It had served on every front, from the frozen forests of the Ardennes to the humid jungles of the Philippines. It worked for tankers, paratroopers, MPs, and medics alike. Even as military technology surged forward with jet aircraft, radar, and atomic weapons, the simple mechanical reliability of the 1911 stood apart. It didn't need innovation to prove its worth. It had already earned it, one trigger pull at a time. In the Ordnance Department's post-war evaluations, engineers tried to understand what made Browning's design so enduring. The conclusion was simple: balance. The recoil-operated system distributed stress efficiently, and the .45 ACP round delivered unmatched stopping power at close range. Field reports showed minimal failure rates, even in harsh conditions that caused other weapons to malfunction. That balance of precision and brutality mirrored the very nature of World War II combat, industrialized yet deeply human. In the mud, snow, and chaos, survival often came down to moments of instinct and trust. The Colt 1911 fit perfectly into that reality. Meanwhile, Colt and Remington Rand, the typewriter company that had produced thousands of pistols during wartime contracts, returned to peacetime production. Civilian demand for the 1911 surged. Veterans wanted the pistol not as a trophy, but as a symbol, a piece of their own history. Gun ranges and shooting clubs across America filled with returning servicemen who still practiced with the sidearm they had carried through hell. The military took note too. Even with newer pistols on the drawing board, the Army and Navy saw no reason to replace it. Official evaluations in 1946 and 1947 concluded that no design offered sufficient improvement in performance to justify replacement. The 1911 would remain standard issue through Korea, Vietnam, and beyond. But beneath those reports, there was something deeper, a quiet respect. Soldiers didn't speak of it as a piece of equipment, but as a companion. It was there when they felt fear, when they defended a foxhole, when a comrade fell beside them. The war had ended, but the legend of the Colt 1911 was only beginning. And in that silence after victory, as soldiers tried to rebuild their lives, the question remained, what made this sidearm endure? Not just as a weapon, but as a symbol of trust and survival? In the years that followed, the Colt 1911 became more than a standard sidearm. It became a part of America's military identity. In the early days of the Cold War, when new threats emerged and the world divided once again, the familiar silhouette of the 1911 still hung on the belts of U.S. Marines, airmen, and paratroopers. It was the quiet reminder of a time when American ingenuity had outlasted every challenge. By 1950, when troops found themselves once more in combat during the Korean War, they carried the same pistol their fathers had used in France and the Pacific. In the frozen hills of Chosin Reservoir, Marines trusted that the heavy .45 would still fire, even in temperatures that froze rifle bolts solid. Combat reports again echoed the same verdict. Never failed. Always fired. The design's longevity puzzled even its own engineers. The Army tested foreign pistols, including the German P-38 and the new Browning high power, but none could replace the 1911's combination of stopping power and simplicity. It was not the easiest to master. Its recoil was sharp, its magazine small, but it rewarded discipline. And discipline had always been the mark of an American soldier. Back home, the pistol's reputation grew into legend. War movies of the 1950s and 60s showed it as the symbol of the American fighting man. Clean lines, heavy steel, a sound that meant finality. Veterans spoke of it in hushed pride, not as collectors, but as witnesses. The U.S. government kept the design in continuous production and refurbishment. Decades later, when the M9 Beretta replaced it officially in the 1980s, many within the ranks were reluctant to let it go. In fact, elite units like Marine Force Recon and Delta Force continued to request the 1911 well into the 21st century. For them, trust still outweighed modernization. Military historians often call it the most successful combat pistol ever built. Between 1911 and 1945, over 2.7 million were produced. It served through 2 world wars, Korea, Vietnam, and even Afghanistan. But numbers alone don't explain its legacy. The truth lies in what it represented, the bond between a soldier and the tool that could save his life. For captured German and Japanese troops during the war, it had been a source of fascination. Many POWs described its astonishing power and immediate effect. Some were shocked at the sheer confidence with which Americans carried it, calling it a gun of certainty. That perception of unwavering reliability fed into the broader legend of American firepower and engineering superiority. In the decades after World War II, U.S. military studies would repeatedly cite the 1911 as the benchmark of sidearm design. Even as polymer-framed pistols took over global arsenals, many American officers privately kept their old Colts, serviced, oiled, and still ready. And that's how it remains today. More than a century after John Browning's original blueprint, the 1911 continues to be carried, customized, and revered. It is not nostalgia that keeps it alive. It's trust, earned through blood and history. For those who fought with it, the Colt was never just a sidearm. It was the last line, the final defense, the instrument that stood between chaos and survival. The war ended long ago. The soldiers grew old. But in every museum, armory, and veterans collection, one pistol still gleams with quiet authority, a reminder of the weapon the world learned to respect, and the men who never doubted it. And so, the story of the Colt 1911 is not only the story of a weapon, it's the story of American trust forged in war. In the calm that followed World War II, the Colt 1911 became more than steel and gunpowder. It became memory, the tangible link between the men who fought and the nation they carried on their shoulders. For decades after the war, veterans would pause when they saw one in a museum case or at a firing range. The weight in their hands brought back faces, voices, moments. The 1911 wasn't flawless. It was heavy, it kicked hard, and it held just 7 rounds. But those who depended on it didn't ask for perfection, they asked for faith. And faith is exactly what it gave them. Every time the slide locked forward, every time that .45 slug left the barrel, it reminded its wielder that design and trust could coexist in the most brutal circumstances known to man. Even now, long after it left standard issue, the Colt 1911 continues to define what soldiers expect from a sidearm: simplicity, strength, and certainty. It stands as a bridge between eras, from the mud of below wood to the beaches of Normandy, from the jungles of the Pacific to the ridges of Korea. And in that lineage lies its true meaning. The Colt 1911 wasn't just a tool of war. It was the quiet promise that no matter how chaotic the world became, a steady hand and a trusted weapon could still bring a man home.